Do ministers who are forced to resign deserve a big payoff? Could Keir Starmer really take Britain out of the ECHR? And is modern-day politics now just a bad soap opera? We'll answer all that and more in Talking Politics Q&A. Welcome to the show. I'm Tom Bradby.
And I'm Robert Peston. Hello.
We're here as ever to answer your burning political questions. You've been sending them to us on social media and via our inbox at talkingpolitics@itvnews.com. So let's get cracking. Kim Priestley asks, why should ministers like Angela Rayner get thousands of pounds in severance pay if they resign? I maybe have a bit of a controversial view in this. Robert and I have often discussed our worries about, how should we put it politely, the standard of politicians that we're getting. And truthfully, we think politics is a bit of I'm speaking for both of us, I think politics is a bit of a thankless task. You know, there's lots of risk, there's lots of aggression, there's lots of uncertainty. It's a very difficult career. And I think we as journalists who've been around politics for decades, of course, it's our job to hold politicians to account. Of course, occasionally we get cynical about politicians. Of course, occasionally we laugh about politics because a lot of the time it is absurd, and occasionally politicians are absurd. But I think we have to do all that, recognizing that it is a very difficult job and it's a very difficult business. And the business of government is complicated and not at all easy, which is why so many successive governments and so many successive ministers dig themselves into so many holes. So I think we have to create a world in which we do encourage people to come in. This is, again, potentially unpopular. I'm aware a lot of people, don't earn anything like what MPs are paid. But I think, an awful lot of professionals living in London would say that MPs are not particularly well paid. So I really do think we have to be careful not to strip everything away and make it the kind of job that nobody wants to do. And I'm not sure personally I do begrudge Angela Rayner severance pay. Do you disagree?
So severance pay is there to tide you over a hump.
Yeah.
And it exists in the private sector as much as the public sector. We talked on an earlier episode about well, I said on an earlier episode that I thought she did have to resign, that breaching the ministerial code in the way she did meant she had to resign. But, do I think that what she did is the worst possible scandal you can imagine? No, I don't. She has, I presume, got overheads that she's got to cover, and I imagine, she may be one of those people who, when she became a minister, didn't increase her spending. I mean, we know that, for example, she's bought herself a flat in Hove. Everybody in the whole world now knows that because that's the fact in which she didn't pay the full stamp duty. She's also said that she took on a big mortgage for that. That will be a mortgage of several £100,000. That means she'll be paying, a lot of money, potentially, well over £1,000, maybe nearer £2,000 in mortgage payments. Financially, and she's got to pay 40 grand in stamp duty. She's going to struggle financially for a bit, I would imagine. Did she go so far across the line that she doesn't deserve any severance pay? Don't know. Maybe there should just be a rule that says if you breach the ministerial code, you don't get any severance pay. That's not the rule as I know it. I just think this is a really, really, really tricky issue. I am on the record. Said it in my last book, How to Fix Britain. I do think our MPs are underpaid. I think there should be fewer of them, and what they should be paid. So I don't think the bill that we pay for our MPs is necessarily the bill we pay for MPs in general is too low. We pay quite a lot for them, but I do think there are too many of them, and their pay should go up. I think if you got rid of 2/3, I think there's an argument for that, and you paid them 3 times as much, I suspect we get better people. And I know this is sort of horrifying in some ways. to some people listening. But there are loads. I mean, it's astonishing that this is the kind of world in which we live. But there are loads of bright young people leaving universities who are going to, for example, digital businesses and financial businesses, who at the age of 25, 26 are earning literally hundreds of thousands of pounds at the age of 25, 26, sometimes even more than that. Now, in the old days, quite a lot of those bright young people, you'd have wanted to come into Parliament. Right? And in the old days, lots of those bright young people did think about a career in politics. Now, they're thinking the disparity in terms of what they earn is so great, means why would they go into Parliament? Particularly since being an MP appears to be all about having appalling sort of abuse heaped on you on social media, having to have the protection of security officers because you're at risk when you walk through your own town centre. It's not a very attractive job. And so... I know it's fashionable to put the boot into politicians, but, we need really good people in Parliament if this democracy is going to survive.
Robert and I here espousing yet another unpopular position. Sorry about that. But, I guess we're here to say what we think, and hopefully that's why you're listening or watching. Donna Watmore asks, will Angela Rayner's resignation trigger more investigations into politicians and government officials to see what claims they're making that they shouldn't? I would say there are already a lot of people investigating politicians.
We've got the Boris files. He's no longer...
People will be digging away on Peter Mandelson like mad this week.
And I think just on the Boris files, because it's sort of relevant both to this question and to the previous question, I think it's quite important to just to also shed a light on this. The Boris files in The Guardian, these extracts from his private emails from his office, right? What they show is allegedly a former Prime Minister taking advantage of the connections he made while in government to make as much money as he possibly can out of government, right? Now, that if Boris Johnson is not really commenting on any of this, but that does bring politics into disrepute. When you see former leaders making so much money off the back of the connections that they make in government, British people don't like that, right? And it just feeds the idea that politicians are only in it for what they can get out. It feeds the idea that politicians are only in politics for what they can make out of it personally over the medium term. It's another reason why you want to make sure that politicians, while they're doing the job, are paid reasonably at least, so that you at least reduce the number of politicians. Famously, Tony Blair made himself an absolute fortune when he left office. David Cameron's reputation was eviscerated by the money he made from Lex Greensill, the business who did have privileged access to Downing Street when David Cameron was Prime Minister. Then sets up this business that David Cameron then goes and works for, and I think he made something like £1 million out of it, or maybe more than that. So, all of that stuff around the way that former prime ministers seemingly enrich themselves out of office, I mean, it's terrible for the reputation of our politics and our politicians. It's another reason why you want to pay people properly.
Could Keir Starmer, Enid Riley says, ever take Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights? I'd say he could, but he won't.
I don't know what he could means, but no, categorically he's not going to do that. I mean, so there are two aspects of this that are worth thinking about. One is that they are right now looking at changing how the corporates interpret one pretty important element of it, which is this element of it which says that anybody who has got an immigration or refugee claim has, quotes, a right to a family life. And so it's this whole issue that, so there were some controversial decisions taken during the last government. So, for example, I can't remember, there was some criminal who the Home Office wanted to deport back to the country in which he was born, but I can't remember what he was convicted of, but it was something pretty serious.
Yeah.
And yet the court said because he had a family here, kids here, he shouldn't be deported, right? And a lot of people just thought that was wrong, and that is an aspect that they're looking at. They're also, and it is an aspect of the legislation which also means that when asylum is granted to somebody, quite quickly their relations can come over. And again, given this inflates the numbers, this is something that the government's uncomfortable about. So they are doing some work on how to change the way that the courts currently interpret that. And in fact, they've suspended that provision temporarily. And anybody here who is given asylum is now subject to the normal rules for other economic migrants, those who are here on the more mainstream economic visas. So the cases of asylum seekers are now being assessed on the same basis as them, which definitely reduces the number, but that's a temporary thing. So they are looking at this aspect for permanent reform. There are quite a lot of lawyers and legal-minded politicians, actually on both sides of the House of Commons, who say that because Keir Starmer as Prime Minister is a distinguished lawyer, because at times he has worked personally in the human rights sphere, he would be the ideal person to negotiate with other countries and with bodies like the United Nations and with bodies like the European Court of Human Rights, a fundamental change to all sorts of international agreements, whether it is the European Convention on Human Rights or whether it's the UN's Refugee Convention. And there's a whole panoply of international law that affects the decisions that any British government can make if it wants to follow international law when it comes to the treatment of asylum seekers. Plenty of politicians, and they're not on the far right. There are quite a lot of centrist politicians, both in the Labour Party and in the Tory Party, and indeed, obviously, in Reform. I'm not sure how many centrists there are in Reform to discuss another time. Anyway, but there are plenty of politicians who are saying that most of these conventions and international agreements were created in very different circumstances, usually in the aftermath of the Second World War, and it's perfectly reasonable to look at them and take a view about whether they should be reformed for the modern world where, flows of refugees across borders are now at levels, we've almost never seen. Or at least we hadn't seen outside of, a world war scenario, right? And therefore, it is perfectly reasonable to take a really long, hard look, not on a unilateral basis as an individual country, but in cooperation with other like-minded countries about whether these agreements, conventions, laws should be, changed in a global sense or an international sense rather than a domestic sense. And I mean, one of the things I'm slightly surprised that Starmer hasn't picked up this baton. He quite likes showing international leadership. Maybe he will at some point. But that is more likely, certainly, it seems to me, than us ever under a Labour government. I mean, we've got Kemi Badenoch pledging that at the Conservative conference coming up, she will tell us whether a Tory government would withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm prepared to bet a modest amount of money that she will announce that at the Tory conference, though she hasn't said that.
John Walton asks, how can we have a deputy PM in David Lammy who openly backs claims for reparations into the billions regarding slavery in the past? Oh, interesting question. I don't know that I have a view on this. One thing that has struck me a lot more in the last 10 years, and I don't know, given that I did a history degree, why I didn't think about it more before, but over the course of our working lifetimes, I feel like the UK economy has become a lot more London-centric. This is absolutely not an answer to your question, sorry. But look, when you go around Britain and you think about how much, you see the kind of wealth that was spread out more around the country in the past, whether it was Newcastle or Liverpool or Manchester or Hull, and now these places are being revived again. But it just reminds you how much of the UK economy regionally was built on the empire, and certainly in the case of some cities like Bristol, on slavery. And when you look at the incredible wealth that was generated, which is the foundation stone of great wealth in those areas to this day, it does make you think pretty hard about it. But I don't particularly have a view on reparations, do you?
So there are so many fraught questions for any government and for all of us as a people relating to actions taken by British governments 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the last century. So, for example, quite interesting that a couple of leading lawyers have launched a claim on behalf of a smallish number of quite old Palestinians who are calling for the British government to acknowledge what they regard as the harm that the British government did in the decades leading up to the creation of the State of Israel, the harm they did to Palestinians and the Palestinian people. And it's a very interesting case that's being put together. There are huge issues around the obligations of countries like the UK to developing countries when it comes to the costs of climate change. Quite a significant chunk of the emissions that have led to climate change were caused by the industrial growth of countries like the UK and the United States and most of Europe. And therefore there is a very interesting argument around given that the whole world is suffering from climate change, how much money should we be giving to developing countries, partly to help them acquire clean power, but also partly to help their economies adjust to the consequences. If in parts of Africa, if we're seeing the growth of deserts where stuff can't grow because of climate change, what responsibility do we have to help those countries in those circumstances with waters rising and threatening to eliminate whole islands? Again, what responsibility does the West have for those? So there's that. And then there is the slavery issue. And I was just trying to remind myself what Lamy said. It is true that as a backbench MP, he was in favour of, I think it's in 2018, he did make it clear he was in favour of reparations for Britain's role in the slave trade. Actually, as Foreign Secretary, inevitably, he tried to introduce a nuance. He said as Foreign Secretary he wasn't in favour of cash payments, but he still regarded this as being an issue of justice, and he was in favour of negotiations that over time would lead victims of slavery to feel that there was some sort of justice, but it is all very woolly and very fuzzy. So he has somehow found his way out of the immediate question, which is what kind of cash payments should a country like the UK make? All of this stuff is so complicated. Yeah. I mean, how much we today should pay for the mistakes of our predecessors. It's just very hard.
Okay, we've got about a minute left, so we'll answer this very briefly. But Vicky Maguire says, after 10 years of social media churning politics for entertainment, can it ever now stop being a soap opera? Look, I think the reality of social media is not going away, obviously, to state the point, to state the obvious. And we're going to go on with all the upsides of social media, giving everyone a voice, and all the downsides of social media, which, are pretty obvious too. But increasing antagonism, making society very divided and all the rest of it. I would say one thing, which is that I think the conduct of the tech bros over the last 2 years doesn't inspire confidence. And what I would love to see is the people who are making billions out of these companies showing a little more willingness to recognize that the health of a democratic society, to refer back to what Robert and I were talking about earlier, which is like people like us who are trying to establish a set of facts, trying to investigate things, trying to put things before the public. But, those are funded by companies like ITV, and I don't see the next generation of entertainment and social media company leaders showing any interest in doing that, and I think that's very worrying.
I mean, it's sort of a question of what Vicky means by soap opera. I mean, there is no prospect in the short term of social media playing a lesser role in our politics. You only have to look at how successful somebody like Nigel Farage, party now significantly ahead in the polls, he is significantly more successful than his equivalents in the Tory and Labour parties at using, whether it's TikTok or other forms of social media. He sees it as an amazingly effective communication, sees all of these social media platforms as amazingly useful. He's not going to change his mind about that.
Okay, that's it for now. Keep sending your questions to us at Talking Politics ITV, talkingpolitics@itv.com, and we'll answer as many as we can. And if you haven't already, do catch up with our latest episode on the fallout from the extraordinary Peter Mandelson, Jeffrey Epstein revelations. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.